Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us today. In a moment, we will get started with prayer just to sort of center us in preparation for this community conversation that we have with our incredible guest today. So, yeah, and recognizing that we're always in the presence of our God, I invite each of you to get into your form of prayer, take a deep breath, close your eyes, however you feel comfortable. In the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Loving God, loving Creator, thank you. Thank you for creating all that is good, for creating the sky, our sun, the water we drink, and our seas, for our environment, the beautiful land we are stepping, sitting, or laying on, the plants and trees on this land that bears us with nourishment and abundance for Mother Earth. Thank you for creating me, for creating us. I am in awe and appreciation of all you do. In bringing us here today, give us the strength and fortitude to have this community conversation, our tough conversations. Bring us joy and prosperity and grace, the grace to love, to view our civic participation as an act of love, to love according to the cries of the poor and vulnerable, to put our lives at the service of faith and promotion of justice, of your justice, to view your creation, Mother Earth, just as deserving of our love. Allow me to become an instrument of your peace. Amen. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today. In a moment, I'll just be describing how our community conversation will roll, and then I will briefly introduce each of our speakers here today and break out into community conversation. So I will first introduce myself, then the speakers. I will ask a few questions of our speakers, and then after we're done with our sort of pre-scripted questions, open it up to everyone here to either unmute or in the group chat or in the chat. Just sort of go ahead and engage with our panelists through the chat. There aren't too many of us here today, so I do invite everyone to, when the time comes, feel free to be on camera, off mute, however you feel comfortable, and engaging with folks. So for myself, I'm a first generation Mexican American from South Central Los Angeles. Here in my final semester at LMU, majoring in theological studies and Spanish. I'm also a member of the Catholic Climate Covenant's Common Home Corps, which is a group of young Catholics, young adult Catholics engaging our archdiocese to commit to creation care. And so, enough about me. Let me first introduce our panelist. First up is Tommy Walsh. Tommy is an Irish American environmental activist and musician based in Chicago, Illinois. Currently, he is pursuing degrees in biology and clarinet performance at Lawrence University, where he is actively involved within his community and is working on a variety of sustainability and civic engagement advocacy projects. He's a believer in the power of human connection through activism as our valuable tool for change and progress, and has previously worked and served as a lobbyist, an educator, and a petitioner for various environmental issues. As a first-time voter, Tommy recognizes the profound impact of civic engagement on the policies that define our communities, our planet, and our relationships in the world around us. Thank you for joining us, Tommy. Next, we have Jennifer. I'm sorry, Jennifer, I should have asked how to pronounce your last name. Do you mind just sharing? Yeah.
Yep, no worries. Jennifer Ebero.
Thank you. I now welcome Jennifer Eberu. Jennifer is a Nigerian American based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, whose work is driven by a call to protect our common home and works to recognize the dignity of individuals and the lands they call home. After graduating from the University of Notre Dame in 2023 with degrees in environmental science and global affairs, Jennifer has worked with immigrants and refugees at the United Nations Commission for Refugees, as a volunteer through the Franciscan Mission of Service, and is soon to begin working at the Pennsylvania Association of Sustainable Agriculture. Thank you for joining us, Jennifer. Up next is Brenna Davis. Brenna serves as a director of integral ecology at the Ignatian Solidarity Network based in Cleveland, Ohio. She was raised in Tennessee and was a first generation college student who has been passionate about environmental issues since her time at Boston College. This is where she learned about the US political system, particularly its impact in El Salvador and Central America. And through her education, she has realized the importance of civic engagement for structural change. She's been a classroom teacher, a community educator, and is currently a spiritual director. Thank you, Brenna. And last but not least, we have Felicitas Brugo Onetti. Felicitas is the Anti-Trafficking Education and Outreach Coordinator at the Migration and Refugee Services Department of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, or the USCCB. She is born in Buenos Aires and was raised in Miami. She has always been passionate about working with immigrant populations, volunteering extensively with migrant and refugee families, and earned a social work degree from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Thank you all for joining us here today. We have an incredible group here ready for an incredible conversation. And with that, I will begin with our first question, and folks can kind of feel free to answer and tackle down the question as they see fit. So, how does your faith inspire you to vote and participate in the public sphere?
I'm happy to give some initial thoughts. Yeah, how does faith inspire me to be active in the public sphere? I think for me, I had this kind of revelation moment in college where a professor was talking about the reality of Christ being one who walked on earth and one who interacted with people. And in reflecting on that, he was also encouraging us to imagine how disruptive Christ was in his presence in his community, how willing he was to upend status quos for the sake of protecting the most vulnerable. And for me, that's been something that's really stuck with me as a way to engage in the public sphere, to uphold the dignity of all individuals. I mean, that's in our Catholic social teaching, but it's also just something where every single person, regardless of their faith tradition, is called to, was to really uphold the human dignity. And whether that's by going along with what is already in policy, or whether it's advocating for better policies. So for me, my faith really pushes me to imitate Christ in that way of seeking to promote the well-being of the most vulnerable.
I think to kind of continue with what Jennifer was saying is, yeah, I think when we, as you know, I always like to think as we're Catholics first and citizens second. And when I became a citizen, that became very real to be, I think, disruptive or advocate for policies or advocate for for the most vulnerable. And when we think of working with migrants and refugees and working with victims of trafficking, we we always kind of Catholic social teaching really emphasize the pro-life continuum, right? And I think the conversation we need to have more often is the pro-life at all stages, right? And so when we think of migrants and refugees and victims of trafficking, these are people that have the same inherent values and dignity as a baby and as all of us do, and really working to ensure that policies go throughout right, like go throughout all stages of life and the conflicts that we see, and really staying firm in that with our Catholic beliefs and not having to feel like we compromise those things, um, voting and advocating for policies or for views, and really staying true, I think, to that that we are Catholics first and citizens second, and really learning to kind of battle with that, and I think discern that as we make decisions that align with those views.
I think also, at least for me personally, like reflection through prayer is also really valuable in like this political climate. And obviously it's very polarizing on certain issues, and it can be easy to get lost in the back and forth argument of it all. And I think prayer is really an amazing tool in practice to keep yourself grounded and stay true to your beliefs, even as stuff is constantly changing in the environment around you.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, not to repeat people, but I think, as Catholics and as Christians, keeping kind of the image of Jesus at the center, and he gives us an example of what it looks like to be prophetic in the midst of empire. And he in the Bible talks a lot about the Anawim, right? The widow, the orphan, and the stranger, and always judging our society and our individual actions by how those groups of people are being cared for. And so I think Jesus calls us to put our love in action. And, I love the 2 feet of love in action that we talk about, right? Like we've got the works of mercy. We need to individually be serving in our lives and in our jobs, the needs of our neighbors. But we also have this other foot of love and action that is all about justice and structural change to bring about the kingdom of God on earth. And so, we're called to love our neighbor by being politically active, especially in the United States, which when we think about the global reality of so many of these issues that we care about as Catholics, about migration, about ecology, we have a great kind of power and responsibility, because for better or worse, our country's actions have really large ripple effects around the world. So yeah, I just believe that we're called to love our neighbors by participating in the public sphere and by voting.
Thank you all for those very insightful answers. I know, Brenna, your organization, Ignatian Solidarity Network, has a campaign, Voting is an Act of Love. And so hearing, yeah, this in more detail and the embodiment of it through not only your story and your experience, but through all of you is just, yeah, an incredible experience. Before the next question, just wanted to let folks know that following this question, we'll start kind of taking some questions, insights from people in the chat or people in the crowd. So just kind of getting those ready, start brainstorming. I mean, we have a multitude of guests here who are knowledgeable not only about environmental policy, but also just how our faith calls us to love, immigration, et cetera, and other social issues. So with that, the next question is, what advice do you have for first-time voters? How do people get informed? What kind of resources should they kind of listen to, get to? What kind of resources can you all share? Yeah, that would help first-time voters really understand the political process, how to vote. Some ballots are really complicated. I'm from LA County. We have 38 different positions that we're voting for. Yeah, how do we make sense of all that?
I'd be happy to go first. I think, well, in terms of advice and like resources, the best resource there is vote.gov, which is like obviously super simple, but it's really outlines any like weird questions you may have. I know personally, I'm a college student and I'm choosing to vote in the state that I go to school in and not in the state where I grew up in. And like to navigate that process, it was a little bit difficult, but vote.gov is an excellent resource for that. And then I can put all these links in the chat as well, if that is helpful. But then like also for every state, there is a website that has essentially a what's on my ballot page, which can generally be found pretty quickly just through a Google search. And I think it's important to know who is on your ballot, or what positions are going to be on your ballot when you walk into that room. And do your research beforehand. You often hear stories about people just going down the list and choosing at random when you may not know names. Like, I think most people going in will know the names of the president, vice president, but some of the smaller positions, the local positions, those are the ones that, in terms of your own daily life, those are the ones that really matter, because local change is the most effective um, in relation to like specific groups of people. And it's really important that you are educated, or you would choose to educate yourself on those specific positions and their and what aligns most best with your own values.
Yeah, and please, any resources that the panelists have, feel free to share in the chat.
I think to go along with that, at ISN, we have Examen for civic life. So it's just a prayer that you can go through as you're educating yourself, which I think I agree is so important. I didn't know the first time I voted that I could look up my ballot ahead of time, and now every time I go to vote, I do that. I think another great resource is Ballotopedia, and that's just a nonprofit where it gets you to your local ballot, and you can look up issues there, and it tries to provide the pros and cons in a really balanced way. And I guess I would just say also check like local journalism, right? Because a lot of things, as we know, can get really sensationalized, and partisanism is really intense right now. And I do think that like our local journalists are doing the best that they can to kind of give just kind of the facts of issues. And here in Cleveland, we have something called Judge for Yourself, and it gives ratings for all of the judges and endorsements. That's local to our county, but I think there are resources out there, and a lot of times judges don't get a lot of airtime, but just as Tommy said, they have a really big impact on kind of the local community. And I guess I didn't know this, like when you go into vote, and it's kind of like a fill in the bubble. It feels like you're taking a test. And so I got really nervous, and I was like, can I look stuff up on my phone? Which is like a silly thing, but like, if you get there and you're like, oh, I forgot the candidate's last name, like, be calm, you've got time, you can look things up. Even though it feels like a test, it's not. And then I think just talk to people you trust with shared values. Sometimes I don't know how I'm going to vote on an issue, but I have people in my community who I know care about the same thing and have the same values. And so we can have some dialogue, which I think is really nice. And finally, use your conscience. That's a part of the Catholic teaching, is that we have to vote with our conscience. And so, prayerfully looking over your ballot, I think, is the most important thing you could do.
Yeah, Brenna, you laid it out perfectly for me, because I was going to talk about forming consciousness for faithful citizenship. There's a document by the Justice, Peace, Human Development Department here at USCCB that did a whole kind of framework on it. I have like their book here with me. It looks like this for those that haven't kind of seen it, but you can just, I'll put the links in because you could just download the PDF, and then they have these like one-pagers that are really helpful. And it really just highlights the desire, like the doctrine and the tradition of the church, and that conscience is a judgment of reason by which one determines whether an action is right or wrong, and really leaning into Catholic social teaching, and the human dignity and care for a common home and solidarity and compassion, and really highlighting kind of those pieces. And there's a quote that I really like from it that says, "The truth is something we receive, not something we make. We can only judge using the conscience we have, but our judgments do not make things true." And so really, taking that to prayer, and taking that discernment and time to discern, right, what kind of what God calls us to do, right, and where we kind of create, I think, the focus is really, in short, that we should seek to build a society where it is easier for people to do good things, and to be good. And I think that is kind of at the root of that, right? And really hoping that that's what we are contributing to, as it is a beautiful part of being able to vote, and being able to engage in political life. And we're called to do that as as lay faithful and just as, you know, members of the church. And so I'll include those links here for people to look at. I know they have the full PDF in English and in Spanish, and then they have kind of different sections like the role of the church in American political life, the dignity of the person, the common good, solidarity, and subsidiarity. So hopefully that's helpful. I know it was really helpful for me as I kind of every year take a look at it, or every few years take a look at it, right? But I think it's just a great free resource, and USCCB has some other ones as well. So for those that are interested, I'm happy to share as well.
Yeah, I think everyone has laid out a bunch of really great resources. And I actually was recently reading the Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship. And what I found really helpful is that the first part is kind of a reflection on like the purpose of political activity and like politics in general, which is not something I was expecting as I was reading it. I thought it would just lay down Catholic's position. But just reflecting on like how our church sees politics, I thought was really helpful, and just kind of correcting some of my assumptions of what politics is for. So yeah, I would just echo that as a resource. And this isn't a physical resource, but maybe a suggestion to kind of be willing to kind of sit in the discomfort of our faith not really fitting in a particular party line or particular perspective on any single issue, and just really sitting with that. And like everyone said, like being willing to form our conscience around or just continually form our conscience around these issues.
Thank you all for all those insightful tips and all those great resources, both in terms of practically how do I fill out my ballot, but also how do I deal with my inner conscience and, make sense of who I'm voting for, what I'm voting for, and what my vote represents. So thank you. I do have other questions for folks, but I do want to give the opportunity for anyone on the call, anyone in the chat, if you want to drop any questions for any or all of our panelists. We have an incredible group here with a lot to share, as you'll have seen. Yeah, feel free, unmute or drop in the chat.
And can I just add one more thing, like as we're waiting? So like I said, I grew up in a household where like there wasn't a lot of political education. Like I didn't know what a Democrat or a Republican was, I think, until I got to college. Like I just, and so in some ways that made me kind of unbiased. But I think there are a lot of people who really want to do good, but they don't have the time. And so I just think that like I was a school secretary at a school in Cleveland for a while. And so every time we had an election, even if it was a midterm, I would just send people an email with a bunch of resources that they could use. Like, hey, here's this really obscure YouTube video of the two county prosecutors like talking about what they want to do. So it wouldn't, say you should vote for this person but just give people the resources that they need. So I also think like if you're starting to build resources as you're learning in your own context, like share those with your community, because again, people like really want to do the right thing, but it's just so hard, especially on those down ballot issues, to really know like where people stand. And so, yeah, so I just encourage you to do that, because I think there are a lot of people who could benefit from that, and who probably really trust you, and your conscience as you're putting your, own kind of voting plan together.
Thank you for that,
I
Brenna.
think in regard, sorry.
Go, Tommy. Sorry.
I think in regards to like the actual like resources part, a lot of first-time voters are of college age, and if you are at an institution, there are resources at almost every college or university about whether it's the actual like getting to the voting center or figuring out how to register to vote. If there's like any questions like that, those groups exist across the country, and they can be a really valuable resource.
Thank
I
you.
have a question for the group, for folks who have voted. if you could tell the story of like your voting experience on that day, like how did you like what happened? What happened like you don't have to go into like supreme details of like how you voted or anything, but I'm just curious if you could share the story of what that day looked like for you and sort of how you were feeling, just to give folks for whom it's also their very first time to get a sense of what it looks like to vote.
At least for me, the process was fairly straightforward. I was at university then and had a lot of resources and instructions on how to fill in a mail-in ballot because I was voting. I was at a university outside of my home state, so I was voting still for my home state. So yeah, the form came in the mail with the deadlines that were appropriate and was able to submit that and just dropped it off at the campus mailbox and got a sticker that said I voted today. So that was pretty much it. As everyone said, I think preparing yourself beforehand is really the heavy work, and then on the day, it can be pretty straightforward.
Yeah, they're usually, I mean, yeah, I think in college it can feel kind of anticlimactic, right? Because you usually don't get to go to the place unless you're near your polling location. But if you're going in person for the first time, there'll be a lot of people standing outside and they're just trying to give like a last push for their candidate. But usually everyone is very friendly. And you can look up your voting location ahead of time. Again, if you should get something in the mail, but if you don't, it's all online. Yeah, and you walk in, they hand you a ballot, you usually fill it in with a pen, you stick it into the kind of giant Wally-esque machine, and then you usually get like a little sticker on your way out. So yeah, I'm always proud to put on my sticker to show people that I participated.
Yeah, my experience, I'm trying, I think I was telling this to Deanna that I'm like having a hard time remembering, but mine was mail-in ballot too, and it was obviously COVID as it was for everyone else. And I was voting not in my home state as well, because I was finishing university. But it sounds like it felt like a little anticlimactic, but it was still important, and I was still very happy to do it. It was just like at home filling in. I was like, okay, I did it, but then there was no clapping or anyone else around me. So, I feel like maybe this year I'll like do something a bit more exciting for it. But yeah, I think it was it was very interesting, I think, to see. And a lot of times during the elections in my home country, you can still kind of participate, especially since the embassies are here, so I can go vote for during the elections in my home country. And I think it was kind of that similar experience that you kind of go in person, but who knows, if no one's really watching, and it's kind of it was a similar experience, I think, to voting for the elections back at home too. But yeah, I wish I had more of a compelling story to share with everyone during my first time, but hopefully this year it will be a little bit more exciting when I go in person and are able to maybe get a sticker this time too, and kind of be able to post it or something at least, right? But yes.
I feel like it's not typical for moderators to answer any of the questions, but I feel like this one, yeah, I can answer. So I'm 22. My first time voting was when I was 18, freshly still in high school. I remember for my AP US history class, I decided to volunteer to be a poll worker. And so before I had the chance to vote, I actually got an inside look into how the voting process goes and how you fill out your ballot, and assisted people in like figuring out how to fill out their ballot and submit it. And In Los Angeles, we have like these sort of mechanical kiosks where people can have like a digital screen and choose who they vote for, and then print out like a piece of paper and put it back into the kiosk. So it's pretty cool. And I enjoyed it. And I actually didn't vote that way, surprisingly enough. It was 2020, so I don't know. I just put in a mail-in ballot, filled out my ballot at home with a little pen. I remember even like just in 2022 when I voted for midterm elections, like getting the little I voted sticker and just putting it on my shoe, having that little pride. So yeah, voting's an exciting thing. Yeah. Are there any other questions from folks sort of in the crowd? If not, waiting a little second. Okay. I did have a question for folks. I know that each of you are very much so civically engaged, participate heavily in the political process, working through like nonprofit spaces and specifically like faith-based spaces. I'm wondering what particular experience or thing that you experienced or went through in life motivated you to become committed to the work that you're doing, to the civic engagement that you're participating in.
I can go first, I think, and if I don't answer the question, please let me know, but I'm going to try and remember what you mentioned. But yeah, so I was born in Argentina, and the work I started doing here was specifically with migrants, and I think I always very much resonated with that story, although I wasn't the same. I came as like a very privileged immigrant, with a visa and with protection statuses and things like that, which the people I worked with, came undocumented, crossing in very, treacherous journeys and just very kind of more difficult stories than but I think because of that reason, it called me to, work with people that were just like me in some ways, but had very different stories and kind of the importance of that, right? That this country is built on this, foundation of immigrants and the American dream and kind of all these, things we always hear and what a kind of beautiful opportunity it was for me to, be able to walk in solidarity, right? And have my faith, be at the core of that. And coming from a country like Argentina that at the time and still is, was very corrupt and had a lot of, inflation and government kind of conflict and issues. It's stolen elections and government corruption, that it's the same political party for many years where it doesn't represent, the people. And just seeing your country kind of fall in those ways makes you very motivated to be able to engage the ways that we can here and that it matters, right? That it's like looked at as a privilege. And as I think you were saying, Brenna, in Ignatian Solidarity Network, the act of love, voting is an act of love, right? And really, emphasizing on kind of that power that we do have as like a democracy, and that the people in the United States really do have a place, and that Catholics and lay faithful really do have a place and an opportunity to engage in civic engagement and an opportunity to, advocate for the voiceless and serve with the marginalized. And I think be able to disrupt, as Jennifer was saying too. And I think coming from a place like that, you are more open or maybe more, willing to engage and know that it matters or that it counts for something, when a lot of times in the elections in my country, those things were stolen from you, even when, the people wanted something else. And we see it now with Venezuela, right? That Venezuela had their elections recently, and, most people voted for, against the current regime now, and that regime still won, right? And so those things are very frustrating for the people that are from there, and seeing the beautiful country that you're from, and having that patriotism kind of be taken from you or be going to waste by corruption is really heartbreaking. And it's very sad, and see, you know, having friends from all over the world that had to leave where they're from, or had to escape like conflict, and receive a lot of hate for that, right? It's like, you know, why were they seeking refuge in other countries, and kind of like those I guess you know, those conflicts and barriers that we see with migrants and refugees, you know, globally, at the global level of the receiver of the country, of the welcoming the stranger, right? And so it's very pertinent to know that the people oftentimes that are leaving, they love their country and they don't want to leave their country, right? And that this is such a horrible kind of experience, and that this is so conflicting to them, but there's, you know, nowhere else to go. And to be able to be in a country that you can kind of, you know, vote, and it's honored, and that it works, and it's like a functioning system, is like such a privilege. And it's crazy that that's the standard, right? That it's a privilege that systems work, but it is the reality. And I think that those are kind of the experiences that, you know, led me to be here to vote, and to, you know, work in this place, and work with migrants, and work for the church. And in other ways, my position, the anti-trafficking movement, is it's a very bipartisan, you know, movement. You know, both political parties are very much on the same page in how we treat individuals, and you know, protecting victims in all ways. And it's like that should always be the way. And to say that I'm lucky to be in, you know, in a place where it's bipartisan, it's kind of should be the standard for many of the issues, you know, that we face in society, and that we see as Catholics, and that we, you know, pray for at every mass. It's like, why there should be more of getting on the same page when we frame it in a way that there's always um a role for Catholics to be advocating for the voiceless and the marginalized and the poor in spirit, right? And all those kinds of things. And so I don't know if that made a lot of sense to everyone, but those are my comments to the question. So yes.
Thank you. I did want to highlight, someone did put a question in the chat. Feel free to answer either or question. Don't want to put pressure on skipping over one or prioritizing one over the other. But just wanted to mention it. The question is around how some of the recent new voters, people who just turned 18, are hesitant to vote. What would be your message, or that final message that can really encourage them and help them register and actually vote? Again, anyone who feels called.
I can go ahead and answer. So for me, I'm 18. This will be my first time voting. For me personally, it's like when I see issues in my community, you know, state, country, you can go on whatever level you want. It's like if you don't vote, it's difficult to kind of hope that like change that you want to see is going to happen. Because like the reality is, like as the Gandhi quote goes, be the change you wish to see in the world. Like this is your chance. You have to get out and vote, because if you don't, inaction isn't going to make anything better. It might by a product of someone else's action. But if you want to be a part of the like forward motion in your community, state, country, etc., it's really important to just go and vote.
I just wanted to, I guess I could answer kind of both in my response, but really appreciated Felicitas's answer, because it kind of reflects or ties to maybe why I felt that call to vote, or I guess to answer the first question, then go to the second. But I think for me, I was really a part of movements within my university to actively engage in Catholic social teaching, and I found myself really questioning why that was leading to political advocacy, because I was just more hesitant to engage in political advocacy. I was more interested in just the issues and the topics and kind of changing hearts and sensibilities, and not really understanding why politics was tying into that. But then I really it was really through supporting the immigrant community in my college town that brought me into really realizing like politics was a direct way that I could be doing that, direct way to protect people's rights. Um, and and I was around the age of 18 when I was discovering all that, but it was really just tying into understanding that yes, there are people that are directly impacted by my vote, and also realizing that it directly impacts people not only within our country bounds, but beyond that too. In a lot of ways, just by nature of being in the US, being in a country that funds so many activities outside of our country bounds, and just really wanting to reflect through research and through prayer on like what those impacts are. And that was really ultimately leading me to realize that if I care about these issues on a global and local scale, then I need to be voting and I need to be supporting them. So that's kind of the message I would give to 18-year-olds, but also just kind of reflects on why I started to take these issues more seriously.
Yeah, I mean, all beautifully said. I think for myself, again, I grew up in Tennessee, and then I had a pretty impactful experience in college. I took a class on kind of the history of El Salvador, particularly with the Jesuit martyrs who were murdered at the UCA in El Salvador for speaking out about how citizenry were being murdered and really maltreated by the government. And then I found out that these priests, these Catholic priests who were murdered, the people who murdered them were actually trained by the US government on US soil, right? And so we went to a Christian-based community. There aren't enough priests for priests to say every mass. So the community said the homily, and I will never forget, I don't remember homilies often, unfortunately, but it was the Gospel of Blind Bartimaeus. And one of the community members said, like, you cannot be blind to what is happening in our country. Like, you are US citizens and your government has such a huge impact here. Please do not be blind when you go back to your country, and remember our story and what has happened here. And so I think it's a privilege to vote. When we talk about Catholic social teaching, we have the right to vote. So then we also have the responsibility. And I think also just, you're voting on behalf of everyone who cannot vote. So those are future children who have not yet been born. Those are children who are alive right now. Those are migrants who have come to this country legally, but who maybe don't have access to that privilege and that responsibility yet. People who have been incarcerated, right? And so we have a global impact, but also like I do truly believe that to love our neighbor, we have to be like Jesus was like hands-on in his community, and we've got to know what's going on, and we've got to be prophetic to build the world that we want, the kingdom of God on earth. You can take individual action, and individual action is so important, but our collective action as a population will have ripple effects for generations and centuries to come. So this is one election, but it's about so much more, and it really does matter.
I think I just want to finish with a thought to what I think Brenna was saying, that this like responsibility, and as it's our right and our responsibility. And I think of El Salvador, specifically San Oscar Romero, right? Archbishop Oscar Romero, that got so much hatred for advocating for his, for his people, and ended up dying for that, right? And was a martyr in the faith. And a lot of times, people maybe, secular, or maybe, organizations, or even just, I think, in conversations I have with friends, like that, you know, the role of the church isn't in a place to talk about politics, or that we are not, that there's no place for like religious beliefs, right? Sometimes when it comes to voting, and it's the opposite, right? And I think that that's responsibility is so pertinent and is so relevant to what it means to be a Catholic, right? It's the same way that we are meant to like spread the gospel and kind of be, you know, walk in Jesus' footsteps and be disruptive, as you all are saying. It's really living like the saints, right? And the saints, you know, always advocated and kind of like all, you know, some of the greater saints that you know, we all hear about are the ones advocating and walking with the poor and the vulnerable and the marginalized, or, you know, going against their governments, and all these martyrs that we remember. You mentioned Brenna, the Jesuit priest and stuff. It is relevant, and it is like our duty, and it is our responsibility, and it is like a privilege as well. So we could ask for his intercession, Archbishop Oscar Romero, to pray for us during the elections, and that's just, yep, that's all.
Yeah, I've heard it said we're not partisan, but we are political, you know, so this idea of like being involved in like, so yeah, thank you for that, Felicitas.
Thank you all. And with that, unless anyone else has any final comments, final remarks they want to say. Okay. With that, I just want to thank a big thank you to our panelists. Big virtual rounds of applause, or in-person rounds of applause, that too. Big thank you to everyone who joined in today. Big thank you to everyone who's listening in on this conversation, being recorded. The fact that you're here today, that you're having these conversations, that you're seeking out this advice, this information is already speaking volumes to the level of impact that you see this election having in our lives, having in our faith communities, the way that you see voting as an act of love. I mean, we all are Catholic. We know that we're called to love on the interpersonal level and also on the social level, understanding what it means to use our voices, to give a voice to the voiceless, as Felicitas was saying. And to understand that faith and action is voting. I mean, take action by voting, we love by voting, and that faith and action go together. So with that, big thank you to everyone for joining us. Big thank you for our panelists, for insightful conversations, for their advice, their tips, their expertise. We'll be posting this conversation at some point, sending it out so in a post-event email, and sharing any of the resources that were shared today in the chat. And just as we started, we'd love to sort of end in prayer, end in that solidarity with each other, and that solidarity with God, our Creator. With that, we'll pass it on to Jennifer to finish us off.
And we pray in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Lord, make me a ripple of disruption. Where there is apathy or argument, let me provoke charity. Where there is overcompliance, critical reflection. Where there is silence, a voice of accountability. Where there is too much comfort and too little action, discomfort. Where there are closed doors and locked hearts, honest disarming. Where others' personhood is not affirmed, listening, dialogue, and goodness. O Most High, good Creator, grant that I may seek rather to do justice than to talk about it, to be with as well as for the alienated, to love the unlovable as well as the lovely. When laws dictate and pain is overlooked, when tradition speaks louder than need, when ideas take priority over realities, and conflict before unity, Disturb us, O Lord, that we might live out our prayer, that we might live out penance and reconciliation, that we might touch the wounds of Christ's passion in the world of today, that we might live out your revolution of mercy and holiness, that we might live out your mission as peacemakers and wholemakers of the kingdom. Amen. In the Father, and of the Son, and of the Spirit.
Thank you everyone for joining today, and go out and vote. Register to vote if you haven't.
Awesome job, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Paco, for
you.
facilitating.
Thank you.